where Mrs. Huxtable was concerned, justly deferential. His wit was quick, his sweater was roomy and kaleidoscopic. He could be romantic. Cliff should have been the envy of any father ever to appear on a sitcom. He was vertiginously dadly. Okay? Cliff is the reason for the cognitive dissonance we've been experiencing the last 3 or 4 years. He seemed inseparable from the man who portrayed him. And then he suggests that the Huxtables were wonderful. Bill Cosby was, of course, not. And he says that the hard thing about this verdict is the sorting of the ironies has been left to us. Mr. Cosby made blackness palatable to a country historically conditioned the worst of black people. To pull that off, he had to find a morally impeccable presentation of himself and his race. But Mr. Cosby might have managed to pull a fast one, using his power and wealth to become the predator that white America mythologized in a campaign to terrorize, torture, and kill black people for a century. Mr. Cosby told lots of jokes. This was his sickest one. If you really think that a lot of people are going to throw away the image of Cliff Huxtable because of Bill Cosby, I think that's completely wrong. People watch TV, they identify with the characters, not with the actors. So the evils of Bill Cosby do not, I think, in any way sully the character of Cliff Huxtable, who, after all, was a character on TV. I think people are smart enough to recognize that. Okay. Meanwhile, there's a lot of hubbub today over the situation in North Korea. So a historic moment, because the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, who is indeed a human piece of debris, just a piece of crap, who has been, he and his family for 3 generations now have been forcibly imprisoning millions of people in a giant gulag. The average South Korean is, I believe, 3 inches taller than the average North Korean, despite a common genetic heritage, because of malnutrition and starvation in North Korea. Hundreds of thousands of people in North Korea have been passed through prison camps. Hundreds of thousands of people have starved to death over the tenure of the Kim family. Well, Kim Jong-un met with the new prime minister, new president of South Korea, and this was a historic moment because this is the first time that anyone from North Korea has actually stepped across the border of South Korea for a long time. The South Korean president is Moon Jae-in. He's a member of what they call a Sunshine Cabinet, which means that they want to make a deal with North Korea. Kim Jong-un finally crosses the border, and this is being hailed as a historic moment for diplomatic relations between the two countries.
But as we look at this picture, it cannot be overstated the historic nature of what we are witnessing now. These pictures coming to us outside the Peace House on the southern side of the demilitarized zone that divides the two countries. There you see the two leaders of North Korea and South Korea shaking hands in a demonstration of certainly attempted unity here.
Okay, so people think this is like a major step forward, and you're seeing a lot of people today celebrating President Trump, saying President Trump made this happen. Okay, now, President Trump has been very harsh with the North Koreans. I think that is a good thing. They're feeling the pressure. The Chinese have, in turn, been very harsh with the North Koreans, which is a good thing. I think they're feeling the pressure. The real truth here is that the reason that Kim Jong-un is shaking the hand of Moon Jae-in is because Moon Jae-in is dedicated to the idea that he wants to get American troops off South Korean soil if he can, and he and Kim Jong-un share that priority. Moon Jae-in is a guy who is of the South Korean left. He is very much of the idea that Kim Jong-un should retain power. He wants to make nice with Kim Jong-un, in other words. Kim's news agency said earlier Friday the leader would open-heartedly discuss with Moon all the issues arising in improving inter-Korean relations. Moon's senior spokesman said Kim joked that he would make sure not to interrupt Moon's sleep anymore, apparently referring to the North series of early morning missile tests last year, according to CBS News. Moon's spokesman says Kim also made a reference to a South Korean island that became a target of the North Korean artillery attack that killed 4 in 2010. Kim says the residents of Yeonpyeong Island, who have been living under the fear of North Korean artillery attacks and also families separated by the 1950 to 53 Korean War, have high hopes for the inter-Korean talks to help heal past scars. Apparently, they're going to sign a formal end to the Korean War. That does not mean demilitarization, of course. There are a lot of people, again, hailing this as a giant victory. I am somewhat more skeptical. So before I explain why I am somewhat more skeptical, I first want to give you a brief history of the Korean War, because people really don't know very much about this war. They tend to forget this war. It's a forgotten war in the United States, unlike the Vietnam War, which is, of course, championed by the left as an example of America losing, and they think that's great, or World War II, which is an example of the United States intervening to stop a genocide. The Korean War is largely forgotten, even though the United States lost tens of thousands of troops in the Korean War. So the Korean War started because essentially what happened is after World War II, the Russians occupied the northern half of the Korean Peninsula, and the United States occupied the southern half. And then two flunkies at the State Department drew a parallel, the 38th parallel, and they said, okay, well, we're going to say that above this is North Korea and below this is South Korea. It was a completely arbitrary division. The Russians quickly turned North Korea into a communist proxy state, and the United States was working with the more free market dictatorship that was existing in South Korea at the time. In 1950, thanks to the United States' failures to stop the rise of communist China, which was largely due to both the FDR and the Truman administrations, then the North Koreans walked across the border. They attacked across the border. They sent tens of thousands of troops across the 38th parallel, and the United States was quickly enmeshed in war. That was June 25th, 1950, and 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army poured across the 38th parallel, according to History.com. It was the first military action of the Cold War. By July, American troops had entered the war on South Korea's behalf, and the North Koreans, backed by the Chinese, backed by the Russians, had been pushed all the way down into the very end of the Incheon Peninsula. Then Douglas MacArthur came up with a brilliant strategy to retake most of South Korea and restore the demilitarized zone at the 38th parallel. MacArthur wanted to go farther. He actually wanted to attack the Chinese and go to the root of the problem, but Truman stopped him and deposed him. In 1953, the war finally came to an end. So in a second, I'm going to explain why it is that I'm skeptical of what's happening right now on the Korean Peninsula. But first, I want to say thanks to our new sponsors over at eHarmony. So you've heard me talk over and over and over about the fact that values, right, the things that actually matter to you, are a better basis for a relationship than simply you were in a bar and you saw somebody good looking and you decided to form a relationship with that person. Okay, eHarmony makes sure that you're going to have deep and abiding relationships. These are real people finding real matches with eHarmony. There's a reason that people like Lisa and Mark say, we never thought we'd meet somebody online so compatible. We're so grateful we were able to find each other. eHarmony is built to help you find those lasting, meaningful relationships. It's not for shallow hookups. Okay, they use decades of science and data and psychological research to send you the right matches. And they are the #1 most trusted dating site or app based on a 2018 survey of singles. Again, right now, my listeners can actually get a free month with eHarmony when they sign up for a 3-month subscription. Enter my code Ben at checkout. So you go to eHarmony and at checkout, you use promo code Ben. I'm looking at a list of their questions right now, and I can honestly say that these are questions that it doesn't take that long to do, and they actually go to issues like values. I mean, they're asking you things like, how important are your personal religious beliefs? Are you somebody who likes order and regularity or not? Are you somebody who is a listener, or are you somebody who tends to talk more? Do you feel better when you're around other people, right? These are all personality questions, and there are ways that they can match you up with people who are most compatible with you. So if you're looking for a deep, long-lasting, real relationship, eHarmony is for you. So stop waiting, start your journey to that relationship, and again, stop playing with the stupid dating apps and go to the ones that are better. Go to eHarmony.com. eHarmony.com. Get started again. Enter my code Ben at checkout, and you get a special deal. You get a free month with eHarmony when you sign up for a 3-month subscription. eHarmony.com. Get started. I know personally couples that have met through eHarmony. Go to eHarmony.com. Get started right now. Again, enter promo code Ben at checkout. Okay, so why am I skeptical of what is happening in North Korea? The reason I'm skeptical is because there are lots of these sorts of historic meetings, and some of them end well, and some of them do not end well. Okay, there are lots of cases in which the West has been played in situations like this. So here's what could go wrong in this meeting. What could go wrong is that Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un come to an agreement. And the agreement is that Kim Jong-un is going to denuclearize the peninsula. He's going to stop developing nuclear weapons, or he's going to, quote-unquote, give up his nuclear weapons. There's no real way that he's going to do a verification regime that allows for anything like that. And Moon Jae-in says, well, in return for that, we don't need the American troops here anymore, because if we denuclearize the peninsula, then we don't need the American trigger force that would bring the United States into the war, because obviously you're not going to nuke us. If there's a conventional war, there's a conventional war, I guess, but we have warm relations, so we're really not too worried about a conventional war. At which point, President Trump, who has been saying over and over and over that he wants to get troops home and out of places like South Korea, he says, okay, you know what? We'll go along with that. We'll remove the troops from South Korea. And the next thing you know, we have a replay of the Korean War in which the North Koreans say, okay, well, now that the Americans aren't here, let's start making some moves on the border. Let's see if we can push that border further south. Let's see if we can launch a sneak attack. And that's a possibility, especially given the instability of the North Korean regime and the fact that they are resource short because they're a giant gulag state. That's a serious problem. And there is a history of this sort of thing. You know, many of the meetings that have been championed by the West among historic belligerents have ended incredibly poorly. I'm not even talking about the Yalta Conference, in which the United States and Russia and Britain basically got played by Russia. Basically, Stalin played Churchill and played FDR, and the United States gave up far too much in the Yalta Agreement, leading to things like the Korean War, leading to the rise of a powerful USSR that had half of Europe under its thumb. Right? It's not just issues like that. It's also, for example, we don't know whether this is a Begin-Sadat moment or whether this is a Yasser Arafat-Yitzhak Rabin moment. So in 1980, 1979, Menachem Begin met with Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat was the dictator of Egypt, and he met with Menachem Begin, and he was later assassinated for doing this. But the deal they came to is that that Israel would give up the Sinai Peninsula, at least parts of the Sinai Peninsula, and in return, Egypt would sign a basic peace agreement with Israel, and they'd leave each other alone. And that peace has actually lasted now for 40 years. So that was a good agreement. But I remember all the way back to 1993, when on the lawn of the White House, Yitzhak Rabin was shaking hands, and the Israeli prime minister was shaking hands with an actual terrorist, Yasser Arafat, an evil terrorist, one of the worst terrorists of the 20th century. And Yasser Arafat then used the concessions that he had gained from Israel, backed by the United States, in order to stage a series of violent attacks against Israel that has lasted to the present day. That has not resulted in any sort of lasting peace. It's actually led to the rise of terrorist groups like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian Authority, which is still a terrorist group and led by now Mahmoud Abbas, is the next step in the evolution of Yasser Arafat's terror group. That obviously didn't solve anything. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember, I was 9 at the time, I'm old enough to remember them shaking hands and the media swooning. Oh, look at this. It's finally happening. Oh, peace is going to come to the Middle East. Peace didn't come to the Middle East because there were no common interests. So the question is the West going to take a strong stand and require things of Kim Jong-un in this peace? Or is this just going to be Kim Jong-un's latest move in order to get a bunch of concessions from the West, and in return, the West gets very little, right? The West gets a promise. And this is exactly what happened with Iran, okay? The United States made a deal with Iran, and now we are stuck with that deal with Iran, at least for the foreseeable future, because Barack Obama decided it was more important to have the photo op between the Iranian foreign minister and John Kerry than it was to actually uphold sanctions against an evil state on the brink of nuclear destruction, on the brink of having nuclear weaponry. The JCPOA, the Iran deal, is such a disaster, and you can see that this could be a similar disaster. You could see a situation in which the United States or South Korea offers a very similar deal to the North Koreans, and everybody proclaims victory. And within 5 years, the North Koreans are back making their nuclear weapons, except this time there are no troops on the South Korean peninsula. It could be a disaster. I'm not saying it will be a disaster. Maybe it works out great. But before everybody says this is a wonderful thing, look what Trump has wrought, let's wait to see the result. Okay? People shaking hands and doing photo ops is not an actual result. Now, that said, the media, if this had been under Obama, would have been fawning over it. It would have been, oh my God, look what Obama has done. It's so great. They said this about the Iran deal. And it does demonstrate the lack of veracity in the media, or at least the lack of credibility in the media. The media are so biased that Trump gets no mention in what is, in fact, a historic summit that's happening between the two Koreas. But by the same token, they would have been orgasming over this if this had been President Obama, no question. Still, as a conservative, I'm just saying it might be worthwhile to withhold judgment for just a little bit. Now, meanwhile, James Comey appeared last night with Bret Baier, and James Comey just looks worse and worse. If you're a Democrat, you have to think at this point that James Comey needs to be put to the side because he is not helping your case in the slightest. Over and over, James Comey made contentions last night that were just unsupportable. So this one actually, I believe, was not on Fox News. He was asking how possibly, this was on CNN, he was asking, how can Trump supporters explain to their grandchildren that they traded the rule of law for tax cuts? This is James Comey doing his best virtue signaling on CNN. Then he meets Bret Baier and things go wildly wrong for him.
My question for the Republicans is, so where is that? Where is that commitment to character and values? And if people have convinced themselves, well, we'll trade it temporarily for a tax cut or a Supreme Court justice, as I say in the book, that's a fool's bargain. Because those values are all that you have. There'll always be another Supreme Court justice, always another tax bill. You lose this, exactly what are you?
Yeah, again, like this sort of language, well, they've traded rule of law for tax cuts. Have any Republicans said that rule of law should not be upheld here? There are Republicans who have said they will vote for impeachment if Robert Mueller is fired. Jeff Sessions has been standing for the rule of law. I really believe that. Now, Jeff Sessions has said, if you get rid of Rod Rosenstein, I will leave too. So I'll take off. None of this suggests that the Republicans have abandoned rule of law, but James Comey identifies himself with rule of law, and therefore he is the only person that ought to be listened to, obviously. And then he goes on Bret Baier, and things go wildly wrong for him. So this whole perspective of James Comey as great lawbringer goes completely by the wayside because it turns out James Comey doesn't know basics about his own behavior, right? So James Comey testified that he handed over material to a friend of his that was probably classified to hand out to the media. And he's asked about it by Bret Baier. Did you leak? Watch James Comey futz around for an answer.
So the story of that briefing leaks out almost immediately after you do it. CNN and others run the story of this unverified dossier. Did you or your subordinates leak that?
No.
Did James Clapper?
No, not to my knowledge.
John Brennan?
I I don't know who leaked it. I had no part in any leaking of it. It was about 4 or 5 days later that it leaked, but I remember because President-elect called me about it.
Did you ever try to find out?
Who leaked an unclassified public document? No.
Okay, did he try? Apparently he never tried to find out who leaked the news of him informing Trump of the dossier to the press, which was used as the news hook by BuzzFeed to actually release the entire dossier. No, he never bothered to look into that. He was also asked, did you leak, right? Did you leak? When you leaked after your firing all of your memos to your friend, was that a leak? And he said, well, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. And Bret Baier was like, well, it kind of was, wasn't it? Isn't that sort of the definition of a leak? And Comey had no answer for that. Comey admitted that he said he didn't know that Democrats funded the Steele dossier, which is insane. Of course he knew that Democrats funded the Steele dossier. Watch him futz around on this one.
Yeah, I still don't know that for a fact.
What do you mean?
I've only seen it in the media. I never knew exactly which Democrats had funded. I knew it was funded first by Republicans, opposed to Donald.
But that's not true.
I'm sorry?
That's not true. That the dossier that Christopher Steele worked on was funded by Republicans?
My understanding was his work started funded by Oppo Research, funded by Republicans.
So Free Beacon and said that they had Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS on a kind of a retainer, but they did not fund the Christopher Steele memo or the dossier. That was initiated by Democrats.
Okay, my understanding was the activity was begun that Steele was hired to look into, was first funded by Republicans, then picked up, the important thing was picked up by Democrats opposed to Donald Trump.
Okay, so I like how even here he's futzing around. I mean, he really looked bad last night, and well, he should have, because he again, is making a fool of himself. The fact the media keep trotting him out, I think they're undercutting their own credibility here. Okay, so in just a second, I'm going to get into the mailbag, because it is mailbag time here at the Ben Shapiro Show. But first, you're going to have to go over to Daily Wire right now, and you're going to have to subscribe. For $9.99 a month, you get a subscription to Daily Wire. That means you get the rest of our show live. You get the rest of the Michael Knowles Show live. You get the rest of the Andrew Klavan Show live. It also means right now, apparently, our Daily Wire news site is now being featured at the Apple Store. So you can go to the Apple app. It's the Apple News, right? Apple News. It's now appearing on. Daily Wire appears on Apple News, so go check that out as well, please. And if you want the annual subscription, then you get this, the very greatest in all beverage vessels, the Leftist Tears hot or cold tumbler. You will love every second of it because it is magnificent. It is just great. Also, right now, if you want to be part of the mailbag, now's a great time to subscribe. Spend the next 30 seconds subscribing. You can ask me questions live in the mailbag, which we'll be doing presently. If you just want to listen later for free, go over to iTunes, go over to SoundCloud, subscribe, leave us a review. YouTube particularly, please subscribe, please leave us a review. We are the largest, fastest growing conservative podcast in the nation.